Speaking to RT today at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova had an interesting take on U.S. foreign policy in recent years. Take a listen.
I think that the United States, the political system, is now turning into something they were always struggling with. They were always for democracy and freedom all over the world. They were supporting people of goodwill. They were supporting the people of freedom. They actually started as a country, as a brand new country, on a democracy base and on a base of freedom. And what we're watching now is upside down. They're just canceling their own ideology.
Well, the words carry an extra weight today of all days as we commemorate the lives we lost 75 years ago on D-Day, fighting for freedom and against tyranny. No doubt the parallel was intentional. But is it accurate? Have our values really changed so much when it comes to our foreign policy decisions? Well, I have to bring in our 360 view from our political panel. Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute, and Ned Ryun, CEO of American Majority. Thanks for joining me, gentlemen.
Good to be with you, Scotty.
I thought these words were quite appropriate for today for us to discuss. And Dan, I want to start with you. Today we are reminded about D-Day and why the U.S. was involved because of a direct attack on the U.S. at Pearl Harbor is the main reason why we got active. Not to mention the genocide Hitler was conducting to the present, where we look at our threats in Venezuela and other places. Is she accurate in saying that we have a departure from past reasons for the U.S. to involve themselves militarily in foreign operations?
Well, I don't know if I buy the premise of her comments that somehow at some point we went abroad trying to seek freedom. You know, the whole purpose of the U.S., as so well put out by John Quincy Adams, the U.S. goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. If we had only kept that original foreign policy of ours, we would have been in much better shape today.
That's the thing, Ned, how do you see it today compared to some of our motivations in the past for getting involved in these other theaters?
Well, I think, Scotty, we're kind of going through a transition. One of the reasons that Donald Trump got elected is it was a rejection of the neoconservative worldview in which, we felt somehow that we were supposed to go do nation building and waste trillions of dollars in places where I don't think our Western democratic values would ever have been successful and quite frankly have not been successful despite us being in some places nearly 20 years now. But I would disagree with her on this. I think what the United States is still doing under Donald Trump is carry a big stick and walk quietly. And where we see threats to our national interests, no matter where they are in the Western Hemisphere or overseas, I think Donald Trump and the United States will deal very forcefully with those threats to our national interests. But again, this is a rejection of the neoconservative worldview, and I am all for that.
Well, that's interesting. And then I have to bring you back in, Dan. Is this also kind of the cost of being the top superpower in the world, that you must become the police of the world as well? As the two kind of go hand in hand?
No, not at all. In fact, that's the quickest way to not be the top power, because we're spending $1 trillion on the military each year. It's not defense of this country. We could defend this country for far less than that. Most of this $1 trillion goes to the well-connected people within the Beltway and the military-industrial complex. It goes to enrich a very thin layer of American society at the expense of the rest of the country working hard. So, indeed, the quickest way for us to end our role as a preeminent power is to continue trying to build a global military empire.
Well, and Ned, do you see that other countries have now become reliant on the United States to get involved in their issues if they have any chance of achieving victory on it?
Yeah, no, that's right. Scotty, just look at what Donald Trump is trying to do, for example, with NATO. He's coming to these, 20-some countries saying, we're not going to carry the bulk of this burden anymore. You actually have to step up. For example, Germany refusing to meet its 2% obligations, GDP, towards national defense because we are tired of actually footing the bill for their national defense while they're spending money on their social welfare systems and other things. And I think that is refreshing. And I would agree. My dad sat on armed services when he was in Congress. He wanted to make sure that the money going into our military spending was going towards the men and women in uniform, that they were being taken care of. And sadly, a lot of that money was being eaten up by the military-industrial complex and wasted. The billions and billions of dollars that have been wasted. I strongly agree that we need a good national defense. At the same time, I think we need to look at where is this money actually going and is it being well spent?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Ned. And I do want to look at the military-industrial complex because I have both of you on. We've discussed it at length on this show for other topics. When did that become such a predominant part of our budget, of our society, and take so much power here in Washington? I remember, one of the reasons why we got out of the Depression was because we had a war. That's a completely different picture than what we see now, as that is one of the reasons why people choose to get us into war, is not to help the community, it's to help actually their own pockets. Daniel, how do you see it?
Well, President Eisenhower warned us in his farewell speech about the rise of the military-industrial complex, and he's proven to be as prescient as you can imagine. These are the people that dominate foreign policy. The big weapons manufacturers fund the think tanks. The think tanks come up with the policy papers, creating new enemies, requiring new weapons purchases, enriching the weapons company, and round it goes. And playing a key role in that is the mainstream media, which loves to amplify these threats and make things sound worse than they are. So we have a military that ironically hasn't won a war since World War II. We haven't declared war since World War II. And as you started the program by saying, we've completely lost our way in terms of our view of our role in the world. And that's sad because there was a great opportunity at the end of the Cold War to redefine America's role in the world.
And that's the thing, Ned, President Trump often says, I'm playing catch up from the damage that was done to the military by the last administration and how much they scaled it back. But is that accurate in what he's saying? And do you think a lot of the decisions that President Trump is having to make in regards to Iran and some of these other areas is because of past bad decisions, in the president's opinion, of former presidents?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's face it, there are bad people in the world. They have to be confronted at some point by the fact that if you will not negotiate with us in good faith, there's always the last measure of obviously very strong military response. At the same time, I mean, the reason that we're in some of these situations is because of a weakness in some of the foreign policy and the negotiation of the previous administration. At the same time, though, Scotty, I want to stress, as the other guest was saying, we don't have to have perpetual war. There's a reason that people want to see that, because they are making a lot of money off of that. We have to find the right balance. How do we have a strong national defense to deal with threats at the same time? Let's take a look at how we're spending this money and where it's going. And I would agree, no foreign nation building. At the same time, we have to have a little bit of an eye on overseas, just to be a little bit of a policeman to make sure these threats don't crop up to damage our national interests.
Well, in our closing thoughts, I'm going to ask both of you, as you look at the events of today and the memories that are being shared by some of the few of the veterans that's still on this earth, when you look at America as it was back then, and you look at America in the present today and the leadership, what do you see as probably something that is similar? And more importantly, what do you see the differences in the role that America plays in the world today in backing up allies going against the wrong? So I'm going to start with you, Dan.
Well, I think one of the sad things is because Americans have really not known war since World War II, all of our adventures overseas affect a very small layer of American society. We're much more enthusiastic. The average American is much more enthusiastic about seeking force, about demonizing people overseas and leaders overseas. We've seen the first 2 years of the Trump administration ruined by his opponents in the Democratic Party and in the deep state, the national security state, because they didn't like the fact that the American people elected him, so they wanted to undermine his president by concocting an absolute cockamamie story that he was somehow in league with Putin. So there's a trivialization of what once were considered very serious matters.
And that's the thing. And Ned, I know you have children just like I, and I have to be honest with you, my outlook on war is a lot different as my children get older and older, closer to that age of 18. How do you look at today versus maybe how it was in the past?
Boy, I got to tell you, I was looking at some of those pictures, Scotty, again, of these young soldiers landing at Normandy on D-Day, and thinking, how many 18 and 19-year-olds today would actually willingly go? And would they even know what they were fighting for? Do they even understand what it means to have rights, to have freedom, to have liberty, to be able to confront these things where they crop up anywhere in the world? At the same time, boy, it's pretty amazing. There's a reason that it was called the greatest generation. And we can celebrate that. At the same time, I totally agree with you. I've got 4 kids. You know, my oldest is now 13. Boy, I would hope that we think very long and hard about where we are engaging around the world. And if we have to use military force, it sure as heck better be justified a lot of different ways before we actually engage in it.
And on that line, I have to end this segment because I don't think it can be spoke any stronger from all of our opinions on this show. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.